Hey guys, I'm Jonathan Suber, and I want to welcome you to our Beyond Sundays podcast. I don't know what number this is, with my incredible, intelligent, articulate son, Alexander Suber, today, that we're going to be talking about the sermon he preached a couple of weeks ago. But we just want to welcome you. So glad you're with us today. Just kick back, relax, and we're just going to have a good time talking.
Yeah, kick back, relax, unless you're driving or...
Well, yeah, please don't do it. If you're driving,
if you're working,
or swimming in your pool, whatever.
With the phone.
Don't relax that much.
Man, well, it's good to be back. We've kind of been away for a little bit,
a
couple weeks. I'm sure all of our subscribers have been like, what happened to them?
Noticed. They've just,
where are they?
Yeah, they've been following us on social media.
Exactly.
And all over the country. And, I know they keep up with us.
What's going on with their lives, all that stuff. But yeah, it's good to be back. And we're going to dive into this sermon that I was teaching on. It was a 2-week series. I kind of made a joke. I was like, if we were back in the old church, it would just be one long sermon.
Yeah, but, I remember said, I can either do this twice or I can preach 3 hours.
Right.
Yeah.
Like back in the day, it was just...
I would do it. People that knew me back in the day, an hour and a half, that was a real sermon.
Oh, yeah.
You were really anointed.
At least.
Yeah. Wednesday night Bible study, if it wasn't 70 minutes of just content, you didn't study.
Well, but then you get into the whole thing of people go 70 minutes and there's not much content.
I've probably done that too.
Yeah, we've probably done that too. Me too.
Bishop used to say it was skyscraper sermons, just story upon story upon story.
That's good. And empty on the inside.
Empty on the inside.
Empty on the inside. Well, I was really, I don't think excited would be the word to talk about this, but very, I think burdened would even be a better word, because last month, May, was Mental Health Awareness Month. I put out some stuff about that, some about my own story, that sort of thing. But we know, just being pastors and being in so many people's lives, that's one thing I think a lot of people may not realize about pastors is we know intimate details of probably more than the average person. We know a lot of people's lives. We know
outside
a lot
of a counselor, a doctor, a psychiatrist. I think the pastor would fall down under that, of knowing the intimate details, sometimes more intimate than you want to know.
Yes, that's happened to me yesterday. I'm like, that's fine. I didn't need to know that.
Yeah.
But so we know what's going on in people's lives. We know what's going on in their marriages and all that sort of thing. And of course, we're very discreet. But because of that, we know that there are so many people who, even before COVID, they were already ran down. They were tired. They were oppressed. They may call it depression. We kind of use that generalized term, but they were discouraged. All these different things, and then we go into COVID.
Yeah,
and then COVID hits, and things shut down, and parents have to become at-home school teachers, and they're like, there's a reason I didn't homeschool my kids, and maybe they got furloughed or lost their job or moved, and so it's just any one of those things is enough to really send someone into a fragile state, a state of where they're anxious, they're worried, all these different things.
Well, just remove that, just the fear of pandemic. Just nothing else, but just the simple fear, because nothing will drain your serotonin levels, your chemical levels, more than fear, the whole fight or flight syndrome and all of that. So you have an entire world that's operating on the brink of a chemical imbalance.
Wow.
Then you add the food, the chemical, people's diets changed. So when you add that, what a lot of people don't realize, because I know we're Christians, we're pastors, so everybody looks at it from the spiritual, but a lot of times before I get into the spirit with emotions, I talk about how our body's a chemistry set. And anytime you drastically change your chemicals, that's why I'm always concerned. I know when I went through my thing 20 years ago, emotionally, whatever, the doctor, I had lost 35 pounds. And then because I was having such a good time and feeling so good, I just felt led it was time to go on a 40-day fast. So I did 35 pounds on a keto diet and then went on a 40-day fast. Well, at the end of that fast, my fingernails were white, all this kind of stuff. I went and got tested, no potassium, all that stuff. And so later on, my doctor said what had happened, I completely messed up my body chemistry through diet. And I didn't know. I was losing weight. I was feeling good over here. And then I said, man, this is good. This is a great time in my life to go on this fast, and doing it unto the Lord, but not realizing what I was doing to my body. And during COVID, one thing that I've been reminded of is you take the fear concept. So you're already being drained chemically. And then so many people I've talked to change drastically their diet because they were at home. It was either more junk food, or they went from being maybe a less healthy diet to a super healthy diet because they had however they did it on either spectrum, it was a change to their body. So then you add that. that, then you add stress. Then you add the things you talked about. You add the fear of finances, multiple kids running around the house, then becoming an educator, being with your spouse 24/7.
Yes.
All those kind of things. So I think that's where it was more of a burden, like you said, because for years, you and I mean, we've been very open about things we've struggled with in other ministry. And one things you've heard me say over and over is something can be chemically corrected, then it's not spiritually induced. It's not a spirit. It's not a demon. I say all the time, and James taught it, but if you're resisting and it's not fleeing, then it's not a devil. And there's so many people that want to pray and rebuke, and oh my God, I'm depressed. I rebuke the spirit of depression. No, it's not a spirit of depression. You don't have the dopamine in your brain right now to help you get through and to focus through. So that's why when you said you were going to teach this, all of our church, and you've got so much response from this message, but I was, even as senior pastor, so encouraged to hear what you had to say, because I know it was going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it did help a lot of people. And so what I want to do is you kind of briefly mentioned on it, and I didn't give you a heads up on this before, but why don't you, because that's what this is for, why don't you share with us a little bit more in detail before we dive into the teaching and stuff about that thing that happened to you in your early 30s when you're kind of at the height of a pastor's career. You're well known. You're traveling to conferences. 3 kids.
Had just had the third, and that was our oops baby, who is the joy of our life, our whole family. I mean, Alistair is our happy kid. It makes us all happy. But when Stephanie told me that we were expecting, it was completely out of the blue. And we had just finished completing, we built our first church, our sanctuary. So it was, I think, it seated like 860 or so. But for us, at 30 years old, it was kind of a big deal. So when this multi-million-dollar,
and the size of the town too.
The town was 8,000.
Right.
So you have the largest church facility in the parish, not just the city. But when you're building that, and then you have, as you said, I've been preaching, traveling since I was young. But that couple of years pastoring that church, the church growing, I had denominational duties, positions, whatever. With my river of ministry, and then preaching conferences. We look back for about 5 years. I preached a conference or ministers meeting at least every 2 weeks, sometimes every week, for several years. And so all that combining with kids, with stress, with building, with finances, and then we were the old school church back then where you actually had church all the time.
Right.
So I taught Tuesday night Bible study, Tuesday night prayer, intercessors meeting, where a lot of my old series come from, was actually Tuesday night. Then I taught real Bible study. So I did spiritual stuff Tuesday, then got real biblical on Wednesday, and then would have usually travel out and preach on a Thursday or Friday night, then come back and teach adults, the young marrieds on Sunday morning, then preach the Sunday morning big church worship.
Yeah, adult Sunday school.
Yeah, and then drive to our church plant that we had an hour away in New Orleans, preach there at 2, come back so Stephanie could be there for choir practice and be ready to preach with the choir in the big night at 7 o'clock on Sunday night. And that went on for on and on and on. So I had flown to Norway.
And that preaching was like, Sunday night, that was going to be a 2-hour service at least.
That's when you pray that the choir sings to where everybody kind of shouts. And if you say shout, I don't mean scream or holler. Those of you that don't come from that tight river, when we say shout, we mean like go
jumping,
huckabuck crazy. Like huckabuck crazy. So I had gone to Norway, and in this whole context, had gone to Norway exhausted, preached a conference there, a lot of spiritual warfare things there. Food, diet, there was some weird stuff happen over there.
Plus the travel, plus
just everything else.
Time change,
exhausted,
jet lag.
It was hot in Europe. So if you happen to get anywhere in Europe and it's hot, there is no air conditioning in the hotel. And you couldn't find a fan. So our family. We can't sleep without noise.
And that's before we could get the iPad apps
and all that stuff. Didn't have the phone app.
Yeah.
So I come home exhausted, tired, probably a little mad. I felt like it was a wasted trip. So I come home. I'm home one day, and we have a conference that I'm supposed to be preaching. Load up the family, all you guys. Go to that conference 2 or 3 days. I preached the main night that last night, Thursday or Friday night. But because it's only like 2 hours from our home, we load up after church and drive all the way home. So we get home at 1 o'clock in the morning because I'd been gone for 2 weeks with my kids. We had a nice pool. I wanted to hang out that weekend. So the next morning, I get up like normal. I walk across the living room, going to make coffee, and just fall face first. Can't move. I'm like, finally Mom gets up. She comes in, and I'm laying there, don't know what to do. We call my doctor. Long story short, I had what they called a physical collapse. The doctor told me later that my body at 34, 33 or 34, I forget, had used all the serotonin of like a 75 or 80-year-old man. So basically, because I started traveling with my parents so young, that my body, because of water and food and stress and travel, by the time I was 34, I had lived, he told me, he said, you've lived your lifetime. So you can decide, do you want to live to see your grandchildren, or do you want to die, because that's where you're headed chemically. And so it was a physical. So when they did everything, basically he came in and, nonchalant. I love my doctor. We were friends. He was a state senator, really cool guy. He sit down with me and he's like, so you have depleted your serotonin. And at that point, I didn't know what that meant. And then he chuckled and said, do you know what that means? I said, not really. He said, well, when you lose your serotonin, that's kind of when you take a gun and blow your brains out, which was really encouraging.
Yeah,
he said
that's
that.
great bedside manner.
Great bedside manner.
But also that's before, this is late 90s, early 2000s, before.
Early 2000s.
Early 2000s, before.
Didn't know much.
We didn't
or
talk
any of
about
that.
mental health.
No, didn't talk
all
about
that
any of
type
that. And
stuff.
he wasn't doing it really to scare me or whatever. I think he was trying to tell me how serious it was.
Right.
But, and I called one of my best friends who's passed now, was a medical doctor, minister. I called him. And so at that point, you didn't have the synthetic serotonin. Now we have so much synthetic stuff. But then the greatest advice they could give you then, they either wanted to put me on stuff I didn't want to be on, or my doctor friend said, well, just eat a lot of broccoli because broccoli's natural that you do that. So I was blessed to have, my parents were pastoring. My parents sort of semi-retired. My dad decided they would come be on our staff at that point. My staff was incredible. Your mom, Stephanie, was incredible. So I was very blessed to have mentors that for a year, really about a year and 11 months, they circled the wagons where all I did was focus on rest and restoration. But in that, I began to learn so much because I went through a great depression. I have a lot of testimony of that I've talked about before, but it was a reset in my life. And I learned so much in that time. And that's kind of when I had to learn to practice what I had preached. If something can be chemically corrected, it's not demonically induced, or if something is diet related or rest related or whatever, you're not going to pray it out, pray it off, because we come from a lot of your fundamental Christian backgrounds make fun of or discount mental illness or depression. And that's when I learned there's chemical, there's circumstantial.
Right.
I do believe there's spiritual oppression. I do believe, as you talked in your message, there's spirit of Jezebel. There's all sorts of things that can cause attack and discouragement and all those things. But I also think a lot of people blame things on the enemy or the spirit realm, on Satan. That's not. It's life. It's a lack of self-care or a lack of reconciliation, things that go. And so that's what I learned in my process. So I was, my 35th year was a year of learning and study and really to focus more. And since then, I think I've made a cognizant effort, focus very much more on my family. I spend a lot more, I'm alone a lot more. That was back when, and you were younger, probably 10, but that was back when, my phone never stopped ringing.
Right.
I was always on the phone with
somebody. You were one of the first people to have the cell phone and all of that.
Yeah, I
was
one of the first texters that my friends ever, I was an early adapter to texting. So, and it was almost like, and I tell people this in ministry, my focus on ministry, I don't think it was, it wasn't intentionally unhealthy. It's how I was raised.
Yeah.
But I feel like I was taught to climb the top of the ladder, and then I realized it was leaning against the wrong building. And I wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I began to learn the rhythms of life. I began to learn just of how to accept, okay, this is my who, then becomes my what, and focus really on my who and my rhythms and the real relationships with my spouse, my family, whatever. That was later on that I learned a lot of that, because I was raised in a missionary mindset. My mom and dad will say this. My mom now, we were raised in an old school way of it was God, ministry, then family, then maybe your personal health or whatever.
Yeah,
but
you
were the
sacrifice
last
yourself.
one. Yeah, you're the last
else.
one. You don't worry about retirement. Don't worry about your health. God will fix it. If you die for the kingdom, you're just a martyr for God's sake. Praise God. Hallelujah. Well, there's a difference between being martyred for the gospel and self-sabotage because you're not taking care of yourself.
Yeah, that's so true.
So I think that was kind of my journey that now makes me very sensitive. When we're talking to pastors or leaders or people that we counsel with, one of the first things I do is I just slow down and begin to ask them questions more about, is it circumstantial? Is it chemical? Is it, what's really going on? Is
Yeah.
it diet? Because the whole serotonin, the whole chemical, the dopamine, all those things, that's so real.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody wants to talk about it. I mean,
Yeah.
now there are people. We have some credible
Right.
ministries talking about it. So when you started preaching this, I just think the thing that you started bringing up in this message was running on empty.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think people realize how many of us, I know I have, how many of us are taught that running on empty is that's what we're supposed to do. That's a badge of honor, to be tired, to be busy,
To pour it all
to
out.
always say, I'm just exhausted. Oh, I'm here, but I'm just so exhausted. And I'm just no. That's not. That doesn't impress me.
Yes.
And
I think that's a big
okay.
thing we talk about with our staff and different people is like you telling us how much you've done and how exhausted you are and how worn out you are and how you haven't seen your kids and stuff. It's like that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
You're not going to get points for that. Like
Exactly.
we're probably going to tell you, hey, you need to step
Take a
back.
break.
You need
Yeah,
to chill
yeah,
out a little
yeah.
bit. But yeah, I think I felt so led to talk about this, and there's several things you mentioned in that, but we'll get into a little bit later on in the podcast. And I'm going to try in this podcast for those of you guys that are watching to put timestamps in the description so that you can skip around if you don't want to hear it all, because I feel like this conversation is something we really need to dig into a little bit, and so it may be a little bit longer. But like I said, I'm going to put in those timestamps to where you guys can hop around if you want to. But yeah, this whole running on empty, because I think you just said it, and it applies even if you're not a minister. But so many people, it's the American mindset.
Yeah.
That's a whole thing of where it's like America is go go go. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You've got to impress people. You've got to keep up with the Joneses. You've got to do all these different things. And so you have that, but then that seeped into the church. And then you have the American thing, but then you have God on top of that. So now it's like, oh, well, I'm not just trying to keep up with the Joneses. Now I've got to impress God. Now I've got to serve God.
Yeah.
Now I've got to, and so this striving type of thing.
I have to earn His favor.
Yes, and so that's kind of why I used the running analogy. And there's a great sermon series, Pastor Mike Todd. We love him, but it really helped me probably 2 or 3 years ago, called Stride. And that was the whole thing. Are you striding in pace with God, or are you striving? Are you running? And so I think so many of us, we're running so hard, and we never stop to take a look at how, like you said, how are we doing? How are my relationships? How are my whatever? And even though it would be great, I think we've gotten this mindset where, well, if I'm serving God, just like you said, then God's going to take care of it.
Yeah.
So like if I'm serving God and my marriage is falling apart because of our communication and I don't know how to, spend time and all these different things, well, God's just going to fix it, just going to take care of it.
Serving God and serving the corporation of the church is two different things. Serving God and striving to be a part of the celebrity culture that has become modern Christendom is another thing. You can serve God and never be busy. You can serve God and never feel social pressure. You can serve God and never struggle with your ego, because you are serving things that are eternal, or what I call primitive Christianity, when many of the things that we search or strive for, that we want now, my name has to be in this magazine, or I want to preach this conference, or I've got to do, we want this podcast to blow up, or whatever. Not any of that's in the New Testament or in the teachings of Jesus.
Right.
And so we find how much, and I think that's where your grandfather, my dad, used this concept called the barrenness of busyness. Because he said, be very careful that whatever you're so busy doing, if it's not bearing spiritual fruit, it's not of the kingdom.
Yeah.
So he kept saying, re-examine the fruit. If the fruit isn't making you healthier and happier and giving you joy, if the fruit isn't making your marriage more prosperous, if the fruit isn't causing your children to want to imitate you so that they can be like Christ, just examine the fruit. And if there's no fruit, and if you're barren, then you're busy for nothing.
Wow.
And that's what we have to re-examine,
Barrenness
I
of
believe.
busyness. Yeah, and I think that just takes us straight into, we'll kind of dive into some of the content from the sermon. And again, I'm not trying to re-preach it. We always say that, but we are preachers, so we do get a little preachy sometimes. But, my whole thing was how if we don't stop to check, then we can get to a place where we need that energy. Because we all know there are different seasons of life. So there are seasons where you do need to run harder than normal. Like, for instance, the holidays. Everybody has more going on during the holidays than normal. Probably too much, if we're being honest. But so there's different times, and I use the story of I used to travel back and forth to Arkansas a lot. You know this. Yeah. And from Texarkana to Little Rock is just like barren wasteland. There's almost nothing. Like I said that, and I had people laughing. And I was like, who's from Arkansas? And it's beautiful. Yeah. It's a beautiful drive. So
cotton fields.
Yeah. Well, just in the tall trees, and I love that just open road and everything. But if you need gas or if you need to use the restroom, it's just not available.
Yeah, there's no Buc-ee's. There's no Buc-ee's.
Definitely not. There might be Billy Bob, but not a Buc-ee's. And so I drove this little 4-cylinder Jeep Patriot, which was great on gas, but also had a pretty small tank, so you'd have to refill it pretty often. And there were a couple times where I would have maybe half a tank leaving Texarkana. So I'm like, half a tank, I'm good. But 2 or 3 hours in, I'm not to Little Rock yet, and it's getting on E. And I'm pulling up my maps, and there's nothing around, or my maps wouldn't even work because there was no signal. And so what I got out of that is we can be like, oh, I'm good. I got a half a tank. But the season that we're about to go into is going to require a full tank. And so you have to check yourself of when you're stepping into a new job, when you're graduating, going to a new level of your education, when you're going into a new relationship, these different things. Are you filled enough, or are you continuing to run and steal from your body and from your mental health and all those different things, instead of running on a place of fullness and happiness and all of these.
Well, that's the danger of living in crisis mode, because our culture has created, again, an endorphin high that without all the stimulus of media and everything else, and there's so much studies on all
dopamine
this.
Hits.
There's so much study on that. So it's created that to where we have created a culture to where that stress, even in ministry or in church or whatever. So if you live at crisis mode, then you have nothing to sustain you when the true crisis comes.
Wow.
And so what is happening is God has given all of us the ability through the Holy Spirit, through rest, through meditation, through His Word, through diet, through exercise. He has given us the tools to handle crisis will come. Attack will come. Sickness will come. Problems will come. But if you live at a synthetic pace to where you create your own crisis. I know some people can't be happy unless they're in crisis.
Right.
So they'll create crisis to keep that going on. So when a real crisis comes, we have nothing to sustain us. Then we blame God. Say, I can't believe you're not here. And He's like, no, I've been there the whole time, but you wasted. You wasted, or you didn't fuel up when you came through a gas station. You didn't fuel up. So you wasted your opportunity to retank, and now you're empty, but don't blame me.
Don't blame me. Yeah, and that's exactly where we find Elijah, because Elijah is a man of God. I won't go all into his backstory, but he's a prophet of God, and he's calling the people of Israel to repentance. Israel and Judah are separated at the time, and he has this standoff with all of these false prophets, and he's like, hey, we're gonna see who's God's real, I mean, for real, it's like I was like, this isn't debating somebody online if God's real. I was like, this is like we're gonna see today, and whoever's God's not real, you probably gonna die. So fire comes down from heaven, consumes the sacrifice, a drought ends. Incredible story. You can find it in 1 Kings 19 if you want to go into more of it. But he goes from this incredible victory, this high moment. I mean, most of us after that, I mean, it's like I'm looking for a book deal, I'm looking for a movie deal. Like that's it. That's my moment in ministry.
Well, run
an
election. Just go ahead and become king. Forget being a prophet.
Just go ahead and say, hey, I just called down fire from heaven. Y'all got to all submit to me now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they probably would have. But what we see is that he's he goes to a different area and he's resting, and the king Ahab tells his wife Jezebel, and we'll talk about that in a moment, what happened, and she sends a messenger to Elijah and says, if basically I'm going to kill you by tomorrow, and if I don't kill you, the gods are going to kill me. So it's like I'm putting it on my life that I'm going to, on my mama. And so then you see this thing, and I have it here in verse 3. When Elijah saw that, he arose and ran for his life. He ran for his
Yes.
life. And so I think it kind of ties into what we've already talked about a little bit, but I really wanted to talk about this because I think it's so easy for us to have kind of these fantastical, glamorized versions of biblical characters of who God has used. And I think you look at Elijah and it's like, man, I wish I had power like that. I wish I had a connection with God like that. I wish I was a prophet like that. But then he ran for his life and he was fearful just as quick. And then we know later on in the story, he eventually, a day later or so, became suicidal and prayed that God would take his life.
Yeah, actually prayed God take his life. And I think the thing that comes to my mind when you said that about Jezebel's threat, and this is something I don't know if I've ever thought of before, neither of those things happened.
Right.
She didn't kill him, nor did she die. At that point, the gods didn't kill her, and nothing she threatened to happen. She was just ranting. But how many times when we're already run down, that something that we honestly, and if we really calm down, it's never going to happen. But we allow that threat to literally drive us into that place where we can't come back from. And like you say, when he really let his mind go there, number one, it was a pity party. I'm all alone. There's nobody but me. And God said, no, there's hundreds out here that have reserved themselves.
Yeah, thousands.
But nobody but me. But I'd be better off dead. And then you get in that suicidal tendency. And people do get there where they honestly begin to feel they have nothing left to give. And that's the only recourse. And so people that are watching or even heard you preach, what we want people to know is we're not discounting that's not real. It's real.
Yes.
Those thoughts are real, especially when it comes from chemical imbalance or exhaustion, and even if it's mental illness. That is very real. But although it's real, we also believe that God's grace and God's power, and then also being surrounded by godly people who love you and by professionals, that there's always hope.
Yeah.
And that's what happened
to. You're getting ahead of the sermon.
Okay.
Preaching the sermon. No, you're incredibly right. And I think those are the things. And again, we keep mentioning this over and over because we want people to get this, that difference between the chemical imbalance, the different things, because some of my story, and I shared just briefly, I wish I could have shared more, but I didn't have time of, I've been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, and now ADHD. And now that we've figured out kind of the ADHD is probably what caused those other things.
Yeah, which comes from me, evidently.
Which comes from you, yeah. But the thing is this is how my doctors talk is you talked about serotonin a lot. You kind of ran out. What's like my brain just does not produce enough of those chemicals, and so. What would I always use a road rage example, and I don't really have road rage, but I have other things where a normal person, serotonin kind of acts as a buffer to where it affects you, but you don't really just flip a lid. Yeah. But people where you don't have enough dopamine, you don't have enough serotonin, these different things, you don't have that buffer.
You don't have it.
So you just go straight to everybody hates me. I'm all alone. Everybody, I want it in my, these different things. And so I just wanted to hit on that for a second because we're about to dive in kind of the spiritual side of things. But again, it's like if there is a literal chemical imbalance, just like you said, it's a chemistry set in your brain. And it's kind of funny to me after all my research. Really, we know so little about the brain. Like we probably know more about space than we know about the human brain, just because it's so complex. Which it shows how incredible our Creator is. Yeah. But they're still kind of trying to figure out how. But
it
all
also shows the stigma. People haven't been released to study or to be honest about the brain. Yeah. People have been fascinated about space since before Galileo. That there's incredible really fascination, but when there's a stigma on something to the point, especially when you come from the Christian perspective, that there's such a stigma on anything that is brain related. I think it's interesting. I've never had there's a few, you have your Christian Science friends and others, but rarely do I meet somebody that if they have heart disease, that they wouldn't take a medication for that or go in their blockage or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But, or anything else, diabetes, high blood pressure, whatever. But if a doctor tells them, hey, we need to help you with something that for your brain to be able to think, oh my God, no, that's the devil, that's of the enemy, because there's such a stigma there. But I'm going to open a can of worms. I just want to look at somebody right now and ask you this. If something can be medically corrected, how can you blame that on a spirit? unless everything in your body that can be medically corrected is spiritual and not physical. That's the only way you can describe it. So either everything is spiritual, or then it's not, and it's physical. And when it comes to the brain, because you have so many people that literally preach against, or I've had people, even this last week, someone heard my testimony about me talking about what we've been going through as a family. There's me, there's you, there's Elaine, the whole thing with our ADHD. And I didn't know until here I am as an adult or whatever of how much does it cause me to be very high functioning? Yes. Does it cause us to be, people would debate this, but intelligent? Yes, in some areas. But does it also cause us our lack of focus or the racing thoughts and all those sorts of things? So as a pastor, I had to come to the point after what I went through and then what we've gone through as a family the last few years, are we going to truly practice what we preach? And really allow the both and model that I'm going to take care of my body, I'm going to take care of my chemistry, my diet, my stress levels. Also, I'm going to wait on the Lord. Also, I'm going to believe in the supernatural. Also, I'm going to follow peace. Do both and, because when you separate those two and you try to make everything spiritual or everything physical, you always mess up on both sides.
Yeah, and that was exactly one of my thesis at the beginning of the series, was that in the past, pretty much every denomination, but in the past, everything, like you said, was spiritual. But now, because of just, it's a good thing in many ways, but we've kind of swung the other way, where now churches are like, well, you just need to take a pill, you just need to go to counseling, you just need to see a psychiatrist. And like you said, it's that both and. And so I want to, let's kind of get into the content a little bit here. And I do want to talk specifically about kind of this Jezebel, but this first sermon was, what are we running from? So part one was, what are we running from? Part two is, what are we running to? And so the first thing that we have to talk about, and is maybe seem obvious, but I think we can get into some stuff here that will really help some people, is he was afraid. He was fearful. And I think one thing, and I actually preached this in the sermon, Dad didn't listen to it. But I actually preached this in the sermon, exactly what you said. To me, it's funny how Elijah had just killed all of Jezebel's prophets with a sword, is what the Bible says.
Yeah.
So she says, I'm going to kill you, but what's she going to kill him with? And then also she says, the gods will strike me down if I don't kill you. Well, he just proved that her gods weren't real.
Wow. That's
so I could see her. I could see her saying that,
but not him.
But why would? I mean, if I were him, I'll just call down some more fire from heaven. Then why is this? Yeah. But the thing that got me so much is I think that's how many of us are, though. That's how many of us are believers are. Is we know it's not real, and maybe not even believers, but we know something. This is where you get into the anxiety of, we know that XYZ is not going to happen, but it feels like it. And so there's this fear that grips you. And so we have to know when the enemy is using that tactic of fear, and it's not really a threat, it's just trying to be fearful. And I kind of quoted you said something several weeks ago at a Wednesday night prayer that I loved. You said, a lot of people want to quote 2 Corinthians 2, where it says, we are not ignorant of his devices and the enemy's devices, different translations. And you were like, but you may be ignorant.
Yeah, Paul wasn't.
Yeah, Paul wasn't, but we may be.
We may be, yeah.
And I think that's the thing, is many of us were like, well, we're not ignorant of the enemy's devices, but then he's using different tactics and tools. You're quoting a scripture
based on someone saying about their knowledge, not yours. And it goes back to, in that context you just said, the reason, because that's incredible what you said, is that, okay, he had proved that her gods weren't real, and she had nobody to run after him.
Right.
But because he was so exhausted, he couldn't put 2 + 2 together.
Yes, he didn't have that buffer.
And when we get into this season, when you realize when God did speak to him, God spoke to him. He spoke 3 things, but the 2 primary things he spoke was rest and diet. And so when you are totally exhausted, before you lose your mind, please rest and get some healthy food.
Yeah.
Get something. I'm talking about life-giving food, not pizza and hamburger or whatever. But he was so exhausted, he didn't even think. So here's the thing, and I think even with believers or whatever, God had just done this incredible supernatural act but he was already exhausted and fearful before the act. So he defaulted back to what even though God answered and proved he was God, his faith had never caught up because he was so exhausted. He never had time to assimilate what God really did. So he responded to everything she said pre-miracle. Even though God did a miracle, he hasn't had time to step aside and soak and process. So he's responding emotionally the same way he was standing there thinking these false prophets are all going to kill him. God says, no, fire calls, all that other stuff happens. But in his frame of mind, he's still back pre-miracle, pre-fire. And he proves that. How many of us, God steps in and it's incredible, but we're so exhausted and our mind, our theology, our thought process is so one-dimensional that we can't even see what God did. We're still responding. That's why people say, well, I'm saved, but I don't act saved. Absolutely. You are saved. God stepped in, but you're responding based on where your greatest crisis was.
Yeah, yeah. And this whole fear thing is a big deal, and I want to talk for a few moments. Again, I know this podcast is probably going to be longer than normal, but I know you teach quite a bit about this. But I want to talk about Jezebel for just a moment because this is such an interesting thing because, you know, a lot of people in church, you know, they hear Jezebel or something, they think a promiscuous woman, and it's like, it's not a woman. It's not, it was a woman.
They think makeup, earrings.
Yeah. You know, it's the church we grew up in. If a lady cut her hair or wore earrings, it's like, she's a Jezebel. But Jezebel was a real woman, but we see this spirit even until the end of time. We see it in Revelation chapter 2, verse 20.
Yeah, all the way to Revelation 2.
Nevertheless, I have a few things against you, because you allow that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce my servants to commit sexual immorality and eating things sacrificed to idols. And so we do have to be aware that, yes, there is legitimate fear. If you lose your job and you're wondering how you're going to pay your house payment, you know, that's fear. But then there's this second level, just like you were just saying about Elijah. Yes, he was tired, but there was a spiritual component to that. And so I just wanted to talk about that for just a moment, because I think this is something that we've gone through quite a bit. You know, when you have a destiny on your life, when God has called you to do something, there's always going to be attacks against that to stop you. But maybe if you could just kind of dive in for a few minutes or so.
You said it initially a while ago when you talked about Elijah. Number one, Elijah, you start with Elijah, then Elisha has a double portion, all that. But anybody that studies Scripture or been around Sunday school, if you say a prophet, who's an Old Testament prophet? Elijah, because you're going to think Elijah or Elisha. There were so many others, but the power that they carried and the incredible things in Israel and all that happened. But years ago, I think, I go back even from that, you have prophet, then you go the current word prophetic, because everybody wants to talk about prophetic anointing, prophecy. You know, I teach a lot on that, writing a book on that right now, whatever. Is so, but to prophesy means to foretell or speak the future, which in modern language means to have a destiny.
Right.
So to talk about, you have a future. What is future? You have a destiny. So Jezebel in the Old Testament, and then when John is writing the book of Revelation chapter 2, Jezebel is simply the spirit. It is the opposite. There's yin and yang, there's light and darkness. Jezebel is the opposite of the prophetic. So anytime an individual, a church, a city, a nation, a ministry, whatever, is destined, they have a specific future. Anytime someone is about to step into their specific future, the spirit of Jezebel will always come against them. And she came in three areas. She operated, you look at Naboth's vineyard, you look at Ahab, her husband, and then you look at Elijah. Those are the three ways she manifests herself. So it was through manipulation, her husband, intimidation, or seduction. So she was able to seduce her husband. She was able literally to manipulate her husband, and by a letter she wrote to Naboth, she had Naboth killed, basically, lied on him, manipulated that, stole the vineyard for her husband using that, and then made her husband even more indebted to her because of illegal activities and all that. And then she's intimidating to the point of driving him suicidal to the prophet of God. So it's three things: intimidation, manipulation, seduction. So in Suber's theology, and I've learned the last almost 40 years of ministry, I broke it down to running us down, intimidate, run you down, run you out, or run you crazy. At any point in my life, or anyone I counsel with that is truly stepping into a God-ordained destiny. I don't mean that you've gone to college and have 2 degrees and there's a good job that you want, and I think I'm gonna get that job. No, that yeah, anybody can do that. You qualify for I'm talking about a divine destiny, something that Holy Spirit has put in your heart that you've been designed for your life, and you're going to step into that. I guarantee you that the spirit of Jezebel, it's not a woman, it's not gender specific. It doesn't even have to come through a person, or we've seen it jump, the spirit jump. It can be male, female, young, old, whatever.
Right.
But it works through intimidation, manipulation, and seduction. And when I say seduction, we're not even talking just sensual.
Right.
Seduction means to be diverted and to be detoured. And years ago, I was in a spiritual struggle, and I was so grateful. I was basically on the floor of my office praying because I had resisted sexual temptation. I had stayed pure. I had stayed loyal to my marriage, and I was almost being religious or prideful on that.
Yeah.
And the Lord spoke to me and said, you don't have to be destroyed if you've been detoured.
Yep.
The enemy doesn't have to destroy you if he can detour you. And I was like, oh, wait, what are you trying to say? And so I really think that people listening today need to understand that today more than ever in the earth, look at what's trying to run you down. Look at what's trying to run you out. What's trying to intimidate you from not singing that song, writing that film, doing that job, doing that ministry, stepping out on faith, whatever, doing the podcast, whatever it is. What's trying to run you out, and then what's trying to run you crazy. And so many people tell me, I feel like I'm losing my mind. And I ask them, have you rested? Yes. Are you eating correctly? Yes. Are you exercising? They go through everything else. And I'm like, okay, what is it that God has put in your spirit that you're literally feeling pushed down and pushed? And when they tell me it's an attack, then we identify, okay, that is an actual spirit of that is the antithesis or the opposite of the prophetic. And so people need to just understand what that means. If you have a destiny, those three things are going to come. He's going to endeavor to seduce you out of your destiny. He's going to endeavor to intimidate you out of your destiny. Or if they can't do that, will manipulate you out of your destiny. And one thing I'll say for our church and our pastors, those that are watching from a church perspective today, Old Testament, New Testament, really in the New Testament culture, what we call the spirit of religion, our religious mindset, is the exact same thing as spirit of Jezebel. They're interchangeable. And so years ago, I did a lot of study on the symptoms of that. And so people want to know, we may do a podcast on that. It just tell us, highlight, and say, hey, we want to hear more about that. Because there's basically 6 or 7 different symptoms that when you're under a true spiritual attack, that's not chemical. It's not diet. It's not circumstantial. It's actually spiritual attack.
Yeah.
And so I think that the thing that I just keep going back to people, though, is when it comes to the spirit of Jezebel, not only could Jezebel not hurt Elijah, but Elijah never had the right or the ability to get rid of Jezebel. And even now in the church, we have all the way in Revelation 22, which means that the spirit of Jezebel, that's futuristic. Revelation 2 is so the spirit of Jezebel will exist in the church, because he's writing to the church, will exist in the church until the end of the church age.
Yes.
So these people that are thinking, you're not ever going to get rid of it.
No.
You have to learn to minister and flourish in the midst of
Right.
it. It wasn't until Jehu came later on through Elisha that Jehu came and then was able, the eunuchs, but even Jehu didn't throw her down. The eunuch, the people that she had manipulated and cut off their future. She had emasculated these young men. They were eunuchs. And when they saw an anointing that was strong enough to deliver them, they threw it down. So what I pray all the time in my life is, I'm like, Lord, because people say, I need to fight the spirit of Jezebel. I'm like, no, I don't fight the spirit of Jezebel. I have no scriptural precedent, but I can get an anointing on my life so strong that people that have been influenced by the spirit of Jezebel can submit to my spiritual authority and will throw it down.
Yeah.
And overcome it.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to tell people that just because you're praying and she's not leaving, no, the spirit of Jezebel is going to exist in different forms all the way as long as the church is allowed in the earth. But it's how because you and I both know, when you identify it, the moment you identify it, and the moment you say who's on the Lord's side, who, and the moment you point it out and you identify it, everything shifts. Everything changes. So if people that are watching right now, and you're going through a situation where, Pastor, I feel run down, I feel run out, I feel like I'm being run crazy, what do? You need to stop and identify the destiny on your life. And instead of focusing on Jezebel, pour yourself into the destiny and the purpose of God in your life, and
Yeah.
not allow yourself to hide, to stay stupid stuff. I just wish I'd died. I never should have took this ministry. I never should have married you. I never should have did. No,
Yeah.
it's the worst thing you can do. Focus on the anointing and the call in your life.
Yeah, because as long as Elijah, when he was walking in his calling and his destiny, he was defeating them. He's calling down
Calling
fire from
fire,
heaven.
yeah.
It's when he got distracted and detoured. And I'll just kind of finish up this section with this thought is I talked about, when a thought is so powerful. One of my favorite movies is Inception, and the whole concept is planting a thought in someone's mind, because if you can plant that thought, it'll grow and they can begin to fabricate things. And so what I thought was so crazy is that it said he saw what she said. So the messenger told him, but then it says when I'll go back to the scripture, it says,
read that.
So let the gods do to me, yada, yada, by tomorrow. And when Elijah saw that, he arose and ran for his life. So how do you see something that someone's telling you in your imagination? And so the messenger had planted a thought in Elijah's head of this is what's going to happen. And even though it wasn't realistic, because our minds are so powerful, especially when we're scared, when we're worn down, he began to create a scenario. And like you said earlier, he looked ahead to the future, and he defeated himself in his mind before it even happened.
I think he expected to be killed before the fire, before God answered his prayer. I think when God told him to go to Carmel, he fully expected to be killed at Carmel.
Yeah.
And even though he wasn't, and God provided, he still had that thought in his mind. And because he hadn't rested, that when the messenger came to him, again, he's living
like, okay,
that reality.
well, this is going to be
He's
it.
living an alternate reality based on his exhaustion and fear.
Exactly. So he planted a thought. And so I think we have to, we do have to take every thought captive. We have to, stir up these different things. But, I always talk about the, 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, people always talk about, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, a sound mind. But we don't talk about verse 6. We love to do that with scriptures. So verse 6 is, therefore I remind you, stir up the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands, for God has not given you a spirit of fear. And so the reason that the way that you to resist that spirit of fear is by stirring up the gift. And I think that's what we just want to sit there and just, I resist it. I resist it. I don't have a spirit. I don't know. I have a spirit of fear. And it's like, you can do, that's great. I've done it a lot. But the best thing is begin to stir up what God is doing.
What gift is
stir
God
up what
giving
God, the gift that God has given you. Begin to, this is why, we talk about praying in tongues and different things, beginning to stir that up inside of you so that you can resist.
Well, it goes
those
back
things.
to walking in destiny. And I teach this so much, but people still want to fight back on it, but it's so biblical. Every believer, if you're a believer born of the Spirit, if you're a believer born of the Spirit, Peter said in 2 Peter 1, he said, make your calling and elections sure. Calling is gifting, election is placement. And it just frustrates me so much, but you're on something when you said that, on the stirring the gifts. Every believer has a gift of God. Word of knowledge, word of wisdom, gift of faith, discerning of spirits. It may be the gift of tongues, but that's not the only one.
Not the only one.
So if you don't know and you don't operate in the gifts of God, and no one's ever taught you how to stir up the gifts of God, you're going to live miserable and live a half Christian life the rest of your life. You'll be saved and go to heaven, but you'll live like hell on earth. You'll feel like you're trapped in a private hell. But if you can learn to stir the gift of God, what is that gift? I don't know. Is your gift creative? Is your gift writing? Is your gift speaking? I don't know what your gift is. And if you don't know, then that may be why you're fighting depression. Because when you've been going through this, I'm your dad, and when you wrap just like what we're doing today, when you wrap yourself in your gifting, when you're creating content, when you're doing what Alexander Suber is, the only thing you can do that no one else can do. What has God called you to do that's greater than anything else? When you do that, it's like demons commit suicide. Things begin just to level out. But when I'm not stirring my gift, all this other stuff comes.
Well, and is it 2 Peter that we talk about that, where it says make your callings and elections sure?
2 Peter, sure.
And if you do these things, you
shall
won't
not fall.
You won't
Stumble,
fall or stumble. And
that's moral failure.
Is
that context. And so I tell people that all the time is, because I get so discouraged sometimes looking at so many believers, I mean, ourselves, our family, some believers that fall and stumble.
Yeah.
But Peter said, if you do these things, you won't fall or stumble.
Yeah.
What things? Make your calling and election. So maybe as believers, our primary thing, instead of judging everybody else and condemning everybody else and all this debating on the internet, what if we went back and just stopped and said, wait, we're going to make our calling and election sure first. Then let's start going forward. But I have so many people when I teach that say, well, Pastor, I've been saved 30 years and I don't know what my gift is. That may be why there's such an emotional attack on the people of God.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. Well, let's go on. We're taking, but I knew this was going to be a good segment.
We
because,
go to part 2.
Yeah, we might have to split this up into 2. But so he ran from fear. But then the second thing that I've heard a lot of people talk about the fear part, but I never really heard someone talk about this, is that he ran from the frustration. So you think about this, you have this incredible moment with God, you defeat the false prophets. It's like, hey, we ended the drought, Israel's turning back to God, like we won, we whatever, but that's not what happened. So he does all that.
That's not what happened. Yeah.
And then he goes down to rest of like, whew, man, I did a good job. God, aren't you so proud that I, aren't you so glad you picked me? Kind of, that's how we act sometimes. But the work wasn't done yet. There were still all these false prophets. There were still temples to false gods. There were still Asherah poles. Jezebel was still alive. All these different things. And so I think one of the things that drove him to that place of being so down and so depressed and even suicidal was this sense of frustration of, I've been working so hard, I've been doing so much, I've been giving out so much. And this could be either ministry, church life, or just in your home life, in your job. And it's like, man, I worked and worked and worked for that company and they laid me off. I've worked and worked and worked on my marriage and my spouse isn't working at all. I do everything I can to please my kids and they still hate me. So there's this frustration where you're like, man, I feel like I've emptied myself.
You have.
On purpose, trying to do something good. Elijah was doing something good. But I've emptied myself, and now I'm frustrated because it's not over. I didn't get to the finish line. I didn't get the check mark. I didn't get the promotion. I didn't get the relationship, whatever it was.
And doesn't that sound like ministry?
Yeah.
That's ministry 101. It's never over. No
life.
matter what victory, life, no matter what career, no matter what raise you get or whatever, you may get a $10 an hour raise and the cost of living be where you need $20 an hour.
Right.
It
or
never
you just
stops.
spend more money and it doesn't even
never
seem
stops.
like it. Yeah. So he was frustrated. And I think that's how life just goes, is like when you think you're done, when you think it's over, when you think the spiritual attack is over, when you accomplish this goal, there's always something else. And that can be a good thing, especially, like me, my personality is very goal oriented and that sort of thing. But it can get to a place where if you feel like you never have that rest, like I can't get that moment where I can stop. I poured everything out and I thought I was going to get a sense of reprieve, and now it's just I need to go again. I got to fight again. I got to stand up again. I got to do. And I think even this just came to my mind. I think this is even what we've seen in the past year and a half or so with a lot of the racial tension and things in our country, is because it's like, it's like, man, we've tried over and over, and we've done this and we've done that, and all these different groups, and it still hasn't gotten anything.
And it's not. Yes,
it still hasn't got us anywhere, and so it just causes this frustration to where you can be mad at God, be mad at your family, be mad at yourself, all those different things. And I think that's what leads so many to a place where they get to that place where they're like, I don't want to live anymore. God, just take my life. Is because it's not, at least for me, and when I talk to different people, when you read different stories, it's not so much the fear of what's coming necessarily. It's just I'm frustrated that I have to keep facing thing after thing after thing. And of course, most people watching this, probably, we're all adults. We all go through life.
Sure.
But there's this next level where you start to it just starts to wear on you.
Yeah.
And the kind of the revelation that I had in this is that, when he was kind of fighting against the false prophets, there was a clear enemy. So there was like a clear thing that he was fighting against, a clear goal that he had. And I think most people, even if you're a person that's like, oh, I like to be spontaneous, whatever, we all like clearly defined, like, here's what I'm supposed to do, this thing by this time. So he had this clear thing that he was fighting against. And a lot of us, maybe we're going through something right now where it's like, I know what I'm fighting against. I know my battle right now. I know what I got to do to win it. I know what I got to do to resist it. I know what I have to do to overcome it. But what do you do when you start battling your own mind? What do you do when Jezebel, she says, I'm going to kill you, but he doesn't know, is it going to be an army? Is it going to be some kind of
poison,
an assassin? Is it going to be, all these different things? So he's frustrated, plus he doesn't know what the next attack is, what the next goal is, what the next fight is. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
When you talk about frustration, I was just sitting here and it came to my mind, the frustration of a false metrics. That I think in ministry or in business, the whole success, the idolatry of success,
yes,
or the idolatry of an event. We become so event centered in America, in church, in every. But the idolatry of an event or an accomplishment. So we become accomplishment driven, not realizing that life is, it's a journey. But it's not an event. And I was thinking, I heard some stories this week. I tell a lot the story in Ethiopia that one of the greatest movements I know, I went into the crusade, 600,000 people. That movement was started by a missionary who had one convert but didn't know it, came to America and committed suicide because he thought he had failed in ministry, because his entire time there, he and his wife, they left when the government changed and all that, and the Americans had to leave. He felt like he had spent his time there as a failure. One of the largest Christian movements in the world came from a seed that he felt. Yes, but as Elijah, he was at the point where his mind played tricks on him and he committed suicide. I heard a story this week. One of my favorite preachers, everybody knows. I have three favorite preachers. One of those is Tudor Bismarck. Tudor Bismarck's family, his father and brothers were the only converts of two missionaries that went from Austin in the 60s or 70s to Zimbabwe. Back then, I think it was Rhodesia or whatever, went back and they were the only converts. These people came back to the States. They were the only converts. But look at the millions of people and the lives that have been impacted. So I wonder sometimes if we need to stop when it comes to kingdom. And yes, we're talking practical things in life and careers and all that, but I want to take it more in the kingdom perspective. Is it possible that we're frustrated because we have a false matrix? And our matrix has not been just to please Jesus, to daily do my best and to please Jesus, to operate from the gospel of the cross and to win people to Jesus, to operate in the fruit of the Spirit. No, there's all these other matrix we have to meet. There's all these other expectations we have to meet. And when we do that, is that why Elijah, even though God moved, he still felt he was a failure. And he even said that, I alone. And he still pointed to himself as a failure because his matrix wasn't the same as God's matrix.
Well, and also you said that pointing it at I am alone. But one thing I noticed, and I didn't really have time to get it all, but he said, I'm no better than my fathers. And so using a metric of the people that are around you or the people that have gone before you. Of God, I thought I was going to do something greater than them. But I thought I was going to be stronger. I thought I was going to be the one that would lead this nation back. I thought I would be the one that they all failed you, but I wasn't going to fail you. But now I'm no better than them. And when we look at, he did this incredible thing. But the comparison, and just like you said, the metric.
It's his matrix. He literally had false expectations of himself and of God. Because we 3,000 years later, there's no greater miracle than calling fire down from heaven and it consuming 12 buckets full of water in a trench in the desert. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, big deal.
It even consumed the stones. That's how hot this fire was. There's never been a greater miracle than that. And yet that man that called that fire down is telling God he's a failure because his matrix wasn't on God fulfilling his word. His matrix was on his ego and his self-esteem being fulfilled through his family lineage. And when he didn't get his self fulfilled, he didn't think to give God praise. And how many of us, it's about us and not about fulfilling the kingdom.
That's a mic drop right there. You might need to throw that mic down. Yeah, and that's what I said. We don't have to go into this, but that's kind of my close with this point. Galatians 6:9. We've all heard it. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. And so, I'd heard the first story you said, but about the missionary where they had one convert. So think about that. If he grew weary of doing
Yes,
good, and so he
yes.
had one convert,
Yeah.
which is good.
Yeah.
But he grew
and was
weary
run
in
out.
it.
Spirit of Jezebel. He literally was run out of that country, and they said he'd never get a visa, and he couldn't go back. So when the spirit of Jezebel seemed to be winning, he lost hope. He was a believer, man of God, everybody, one of the greatest men. My parents knew him personally. Incredible man of God. His legacy is amazing, but he short-circuited and stopped his legacy short. He probably, God would have opened the door. I don't know what God would have done in the future.
Yeah,
but
who
yet,
knows?
But who knows? But yet, that's that whole run you down, run you out, run you crazy scenario.
And I think some of that, I've heard it said before. Some of those things that we do, because we're all impacting people, we're encouraging people, we're planting those seeds, those different things, and you may never see the result. You may only see it when you get to heaven. You may only see it after death.
Yeah.
And
But
so
we're
we
not
can't
taught that.
we can't judge our success on what it looks like right now. That hey, I'm alone in the desert and I'm all by myself, and Jezebel's after me. Because that's how many of it. I don't have any friends. I can't keep a relationship. Nobody's supporting me. Whatever. And I'm all alone here. And I thought I was going to do something good for God. It's like, yes, you have more to do. But right now, it doesn't look like it with your natural eyes.
That's historically, biblically. What you just said is historically biblical and Christian, but it's not modern day consumer cultural Christianity. It is not this, how do I say it? Well, it goes celebrity Christianity. You can't believe that and be a part of celebrity Christianity. Because if you're going to be a celebrity Christian, you have to have results. You have to have followers,
Tangible,
money, tangible, carnal results to validate your relationship with God.
Wow.
So it's a culture war.
Yeah. So you just have to do good, trust God with the results. So the last thing we're coming to the end now.
Finally,
and this is kind of where I switched it up on him a little bit, but talking about what are we running from? So he was running from fear, he was running from frustration, but then the next thing is he ran from the fire. And so what I was talking about in this, because I kind of flipped it on him. And I was talking about how we know, we've taught this several times. I think you even did this at a second Wednesday now, a couple months ago. But fire in the Bible is always representative of the presence of God. So you have the pillar of fire that leads the children of Israel. You have Moses in the burning bush. You have fire in the upper room. You have all these different things. Fire falling down from heaven. So it always represents God's presence. So he, in my mind, and maybe this isn't super revelation, but in my mind, I'm a pretty simple guy. If God has just done something incredible, if he just protected me from hundreds and hundreds of people that are trying to kill me, why wouldn't I go back to that same place where he was last time? Why would I run in the opposite direction? Hide. So Elijah, instead of saying, "Oh, you're coming to me," well, hey, I'm gonna go back to my spot where I know God fell. I know he was there, so I'm gonna believe that he was gonna be there again. But he ran from that fire. And I think sometimes we associate, and I said it real great in the sermon, but we associate this the failure, the frustrations, all of these things that we're going through. Oftentimes at the same time, we're praying, we're fasting, we're going to church. And so we can begin to associate the things that I'm going through with being in a relationship with God, with the fire of God. And so we will give up and say, well, I would rather just run away from the fire so that I don't have to deal with this stuff anymore, so that I don't have to deal with this pressure. Instead of realizing, no, you need to get closer to the fire. You need to get more in the fire. But he just ran from it. So why would you run away from where you
or why
know God
would you
is?
run from the people that are celebrating you? Because in that same scenario, while he's doing that, the people fall down, including the king, and confess and reaffirm that Jehovah is God. He is in revival.
Yeah.
So he is with people that celebrate him. They are celebrating. The prophet, you're right.
TBN is on the way.
Yeah, TBN's on the way. And instead of staying there and allowing those people to help him overthrow Jezebel, allowing those same people to rise up and to go forward, he disassociates himself from that and goes and hides again because he is completely emotionally, physically exhausted.
Yeah, I can't be around the people. I can't deal with even
Can't
if they're
handle it.
celebrating them.
Even if it's good, I can't be around.
I can't
it.
be around them, and so I think so many of us, we need to realize that this is one of the enemy's greatest tactics, and really what I think Jezebel's plan may have been all along is. And we know now that God's presence is released everywhere. What wasn't that way in the Old Testament, but Jezebel's thought process, if I can just kind of read into it some, if I can drive Elijah as far away from the altar as possible, as far away from the fire as possible, then he won't have the strength, and maybe I could kill him. Because I'm just thinking, Jezebel may have thought, hey, well, if he goes back to the altar, I know I can't defeat him. But if he's running somewhere all by himself, doesn't even have his servant with him, then maybe I can defeat him while he's running.
Man, that ties into what Bishop Tenney always said. Here's what he said. He said, I don't believe that Jezebel ever thought she could kill Elijah. I think she just wanted to see him run.
Wow.
And that's exactly what you just said. And so I think we're on the core of that. What if the enemy knows he does not have, going back to Job, whatever, he does not have the ability to kill you.
No.
But he can make you kill yourself.
Yep.
And he can make you run out of the will, run away from the altar, run out of your destiny and out of the will of God. He can't kill you, but he can make you run another direction.
Yeah. And I think, that kind of sums it all up, what you just said. I think the enemy can't kill us, but he can get us to kill ourselves. And maybe, that might sound, not very
even physical.
Intense,
yeah, sure.
But it is, that's an epidemic we have right now. So that's a real thing we need to talk about. But also, like you've said, kill your dreams, kill your destiny, kill your marriage, kill whatever, just kill your drive in life, kill your happiness, your joy, all these different things. If he can do that, if he can detour you, if he can knock you off course, then he's won. Then he's done his job. He's gotten you out of alignment. And so I think we have to pay very close attention to that, because I think that's why so many people can begin to be disillusioned by the things of God, by the church, by the Spirit, is because they are associating the fire with the fight. They're associating, okay, God protected me while I was fighting. He sent down the fire, but now all I can think about is the fight. So all I can think about is when God was with me last, I was fighting. So I don't want to fight anymore, so I don't want God to be with me
anymore. And I've been there twice. I've been through 2 different seasons of my life where I was at that point. As you said, well, look, I couldn't even handle phone calls from real friends or around people that truly love me. I had no emotional margin left. I could just get to a point. I think we all get that point. And the only thing that will get you out of that is going back. Where is the last place? Like, again, I keep quoting Bishop a lot today, but when I can't track God, I have to trust God. So where's the last place I felt God? And I have to push everything aside and go back to that last place that the fire fell.
Yeah. Yeah. Where and I said that on Sunday. I didn't know it was a quote from him, but I was saying, is it a physical place? I've heard of people that had an encounter with God, and they may go, and it was a church, and that church may not even be there anymore, but they've gone to the property and just gotten in the physical space that they were in.
I've done it.
So it could be a physical, it could be a song. Like I've been talking about this a lot recently, but I love all the new songs and all. But I think sometimes there are songs that did something for us at one time, and they were so important and impactful, and maybe it's old, maybe nobody knows it, but maybe you need to go back to that song. Do you need to go back to that book?
Absolutely.
That devotional plan, that that prayer time that you used to do, that special prayer routine, whatever it was. But like you said, where is the last time that you felt that power, that you felt that? And I would even say, even go beyond not just in a service, but where was it? Where it was a personal. Yes. This is for me.
And where
this is all by myself.
Where's the last time because fire also represents passion. Where's the last place that your purpose was truly stirred to where you felt passionate about it?
Yeah.
Where's the last place that you were really connected in your emotions with your purpose?
Wow.
Again, that's your destiny. You mentioned that there's 3 different places, but one is an old church now that it may be closed now, but it was basically like someone was running a vintage like garage sale out of this old church in East Texas. but it's where I was baptized.
Wow.
It's where my dad baptized me on a missionary journey as a kid. About 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, we were pastoring Oasis. I sat in that parking lot. Literally, and I'm talking about when we talk rundown church. They're running a garage sale out of this building, basically, in this small town.
There's
Vidor,
no
Texas.
ambiance.
Vidor, I sat in my car and wept until I began to pray in the Spirit and sobbed and felt the presence of God, because it was a place of memorial for me.
Yes.
Same way as a church where I received the baptism of the Holy Spirit in Henderson, Texas. I don't even know 3 people go there. I don't know. It's not, you drive by and miss it, but there's something there in my spirit that it's a memorial. And so I'm asking people today, I know this has been long, guys, but as we've been talking, have you ever felt that place of peace and purpose with God to where you felt whole in the Spirit? If so, and you're struggling emotionally, physically, even mentally, I would ask you, go back and revisit. Peter says that a lot. He says, I want to stir to your remembrance. I want you to, I want to stir you up. Again, that's that gift of God thing, but I want to stir you up to remembrance.
Yeah, it's not always, that's why we take communion. It's not always a new thing. Sometimes it's just remembering.
It's a testimony.
And I think even, a lot of times in churches now, we don't really have altars like we used to, but even when you really look at the true definition, it was a memorial. It was where, we are putting a marker here because God did something incredible. And I know even for me, we've talked about this recently, there were things in the denomination that we grew up in that we didn't agree with, that were hurtful, that were whatever. But then, like you said, even though I don't agree with everything, there's memorial
some God stuff that's real,
where God did some things in my life where I can't deny it. And so I've gone back and listened to some of those old sermons, and they'll say stuff, and I'm like, I don't really agree with that theology anymore. But again, it's that stirring up for me. When everything around me is bad and I'm running for my life and I'm running on empty, I go back to when I was filled. It's like go back to the gas station. Even if you have have you ever? I know I've done it on that trip. From Little Rock to Texarkana, I had to turn around
and go back.
And go back to get the gas because it would still be closer to turn around than I wouldn't make it to the next gas station. So I think sometimes we have to do that where we recognize what the enemy's doing. We call it out. We see what is spiritual, what is physical, what is circumstantial, what is just going on in life right now. But then also we have to look at where can we be filled back up? Where can we be filled back up?
Well, where's that scripture that says go back to the ancient landmarks?
Oh man, I don't know. I can look it up real quick.
But I don't want to sidetrack. We got to close. But that is a context in Scripture. There is a time when you go back, and you were saying that there's a place in Louisiana. And if I said it, a lot of people listening might know it. But there's a prayer chapel in Louisiana that had like Bishop's prayer chair and other things that are in that chapel. I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, I wonder if I could call somebody and get permission just to go in that chapel alone. And just spend a couple of days in prayer in that chapel. Is there something in that building? No, it's just a building. But some things happened to me and in me in that building that I'll always remember and be precious to me.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
Well, man, this has been great. It's been a little bit longer than normal, like I said, but I'll try to put those timestamps and everything. And also I'm going to try to put some resources if people are struggling with mental health and even maybe suicidal thoughts and different things. Put some links in the bottom of this video. But thank you guys so much for being with us today. Thanks for sticking around. Amen. Hopefully you watched the whole thing. There was a lot of good content. Dad, thank you. You were dropping bombs around here. But thank you guys so much for watching. As always, we ask, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to this channel, like this video, and then also drop us a comment. It helps us know what you guys are wanting more of. Maybe you just want to tell us something was really good. Maybe you want to ask, hey, can you guys go into more detail on that? But let us know. We would love to interact with you guys, love to respond with you guys. So again, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you on the next episode of Beyond Sundays. See you guys later.
See ya.